Thanks for hopping on, Brandon, by the way.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's good to have you. It's good to finally sit kind of face to face. I know we've had some phone conversations over the past several months and been working with Christian Post and all that. So it's good to sit down and talk. I guess talk a little bit about, we'll get started, talk a little bit about kind of your background, how you got started writing for Christian Post, how you got started in politics, what your emphasis is, and what it's been over the last several years, especially.
Well, I started in 2016 in just kind of I really wasn't looking to go into journalism per se, but an opportunity came along and I just walked through the door and did it. And it was the day after the Pulse nightclub massacre, interestingly enough, was my first day on the job during my trial period. And so well,
that's fun.
Actually, yeah. So I look back on that and I just think, wow, was that kind of a weird foreshadowing of what would come in light of just the strangeness of that day. And that was June of 2016. And I think that I look back on that and I just think it was probably the providence of God that I wound up where I did. And I soon learned about what was happening in the transgender space. It was very disorienting to learn about the language being manipulated through the press. I would see phrases appear in mainstream publications like assign the wrong sex at birth or gender at birth and referring to males as she and her, and I couldn't get my head around it. And I was just struggling to understand. Then I realized, well, I'm a part of the media now, and I realize what's going on, and I feel a certain obligation to not participate in this Orwellian gender newspeak. And so it was just kind of one of those convictions that I realized that, well, if the press, which is charged with speaking truthfully on this, is going to deliberately obfuscate and manipulate language in service to this ideology, I'm going to not participate in that and at least go against that with my own reporting. And working for a Christian publication, my editor shared that view, and I started falling down the rabbit hole. And so the transgender issue, especially with respect to the medicalization that was happening, which was a very alarming thing to learn about, how they were giving children experimental drugs in pursuit of something physiologically impossible, becoming the other sex. It was just, you just fall down the rabbit hole and you learn how many insane things are happening as a result of an ideology that's taken over all of our institutions. But that hasn't been the only thing that I reported on, especially during the first 5 years of my career here. A lot of the bioethics issues, euthanasia, assisted suicide, some right to life stuff. I've also covered sort of theological explainers when there's some sort of controversy within churches and that kind of thing. I would be tasked to write about those and any other breaking news item.
So your background is you have a degree in human rights, correct?
That came later. Yeah, 2021, 2022, I went to graduate school here at the Catholic University of America. I did a Master of Arts in a interdisciplinary program tailored around the 1948 project of the Universal Declaration of Rights, of Human Rights, which was the document that was forged in the aftermath of World War II to try and establish some kind of universally agreed upon code of human rights that most of the nations of the world could agree on. And a lot of people signed on to that document, particularly because in light of what we saw with the atrocities of the Nazis in World War II, that was... Yeah.
The post-war consensus, as they call it now.
A can of worms there.
Yeah. Right. No, that's great. So I guess let's get into just some of the reporting you've done specifically on the transgender phenomena. I know that's a hot button issue. It has been for years. Yeah. And so what have you seen? What have you experienced? Just kind of any crazy stories you'd like to share?
Well, it's definitely not something that I thought that I would sign up for on career day.
Right.
It's one of those strange things, because what I would find is, as I would start reporting on this just from a breaking news perspective, and people were starting to wonder, the issue is so odd and strange. And it was like, why do you even care about this? It seems like it's affecting such a tiny number of people. Why does it even matter to you? It was a hard thing for the masses to get. I mean, just like, what, you're obsessing over this thing called transgenderism. And what finally broke through to people was when they realized that this is affecting everything. This is not a small issue. This is in our schools. Children are being indoctrinated to believe they can be born in the wrong body. This is in the media. This is how your information is. People are lying about basic facts to you. Just even the simple things like filling out documents, you can select from a number of genders. I mean, everywhere you go. This is in our prison system. Men are being transferred into female only, what should be female only correctional facilities. This is not a small thing affecting a few people, but it took a while for people to understand that, because the language that was being conveyed through media was shaping everybody's mind to make them think that gender ideology is this neutral, sophisticated, even-handed way to think about the world, when it's all in fact based on a lie. And so realizing what I was up against, the epistemological crisis of lying to people about something that is so obvious, the sex of the human body, and then realizing that as a result of those lies, there was a tremendous child abuse and medical scandal that was occurring throughout all of our hospitals and in clinics nationwide, where you're drugging children and cutting off their physically healthy body parts. And it sounds so horrible that, in addition to the issue being weird and people just not getting what this is, it's so terrible that it paralyzes people. Like, they can't be doing that. They're not cutting off the breasts of 12 and 13-year-old girls. That's not happening. They have there's institutional safeguards in the hospitals. Like, there's no way they do that. Oh, yes, they are. But it's celebrated. It's celebrated as the next frontier of civil rights. This is something that you must be a good person in liberal circles, the LGBTQ, all that stuff. And so it was just this kind of thing where I felt like I've been punching through the air and also through the wall for years, just to convey the depth and the gravity of what's happening. And it's only been in the last couple years where I finally felt a little bit vindicated, in light of what's happened in our country with, I think, the election of Trump. Whatever you think of him, the data, the post-mortem election data showed that this was an issue. These issues were on the minds of voters, and in a consequential way. In the swing states, there are numbers that show that. But this is, I think, when you're confronted with a lie of this magnitude, it throws people off their center of gravity, is what I'd like to say.
Oh, totally.
You find we are socially conservative, theologically orthodox, evangelical Christians, but you'd be surprised, Mikhail, how many people who are not religious at all, left-leaning, from blue states, they call me, they inbox me, and they're like, I feel like my entire life has been upended. I'm not even sure what I believe anymore because of this insanity. It's ruined my family. My relatives don't talk to me anymore because I have suspicion. I'm cautious about this, and I've never seen anything so cult-like and dogmatic and authoritarian. It's just, it really does ruin people's lives across the spectrum. And so to be a ballast and to be a bulwark of relentless truthfulness and sanity is something that I've determined to be, and we at the Christian Post are not going to budge on this, because, as my executive editor likes to say, the two most important questions that we face both in the church and as a society is, what is a human being, and what does it mean to be a human being? Those are very two crucial anthropological and theological questions that, if we don't answer those with the kind of clarity that the hour demands, we don't have anything to say about the gospel. Those things are very foundational. And so, but even if you're not religious, I think a lot of people across the spectrum in America and in the world understand that if we don't define human beings properly, we're going to end up in harm's way, to put it mildly. And
even a
harms
lot
are
of
catastrophic in this
right,
space.
even a lot of non-Christians, they're still made in the image of God. They can't help it.
Yeah.
They still understand, they still have a law written in their heart that points them in a certain direction. That's similar to all. That's the same to all of us. They still, even selfishly, you want to define what a human is and how a human ought to be treated because it affects you because you're human. And even the most atheistic, God-hating, selfish person, it just pragmatically would want some level of dignity and human rights applied to them. And so they even someone like that would care, should and does a lot. I mean, you look around the world, even around this country, does seem to care about that. Yeah. What have you seen? And this is a challenging question. What have you seen troubling about the Christian response to this stuff, by and large? Not to step on too many toes here.
Well, there are things that really trouble me. I will say that I'll start with the good. I think it's been good to see Christians who are bold and have never wavered from these kinds of first order issues. And I consider this a first order cornerstone teaching of our faith, to recognize and uphold the inherent dignity of every person, male and female, made in God's image. There's a remnant of faithful Christians in this country and around the world who have never backed down from that, and they have stood up and been counted. One of the things that has frustrated me is that I think there has also been some hesitance from some Christians who they are just so averse to political engagement because they have this view that any sort of politicking at all is inherently idolatrous and the pursuit of power, and they don't want to mix their faith with politics. And on one hand, I understand that because I believe that a church service shouldn't be a political rally. Okay, great. I mean, that's not what church is for. But I mean, you're the salt of the earth. I mean, what good is your faith if you're not going to translate what you believe and apply it to all spheres of life? Does that mean an authoritarian takeover of the government where everyone has to be Christian? Of course not. But I think there are some people that are, for whatever reason, disaffected and disillusioned by the way in which some Christians have previously treated political engagement, that they've just taken a hands-off approach, and they've thought that if they could just be kind and winsome enough, all of these evils would just go away. And I think that's also naive. And so some people have just not wanted to engage any of these touchy things at all, preferring that they would go away, particularly given how I think some people were very disillusioned that Christians did say that they opposed same-sex marriage, and they had 31 states vote to uphold marriage, and that didn't work. And so they don't even think things can work anymore, even when you do stand up and voice your opinion at the ballot box. And so I think there's a mix of the thinking varies in terms of how people have thought about how to deal with this. And some Christians I've also interacted with really have compassionate hearts for people, and they think that maybe going along with a pronoun or two is going to help people alleviate their distress, and they don't want to contribute to further distress and harm. But I would tell them that I think they are not being spiritually discerning enough to realize just how pernicious the ideology is, and that it's not helpful to lie, and you shouldn't manipulate your language in order to solve a problem that's rooted in that lie. And you have to, I mean, everybody has their role to play, of course. I mean, there are people who can go on the front lines and fight the battles in the political realm, and there are those who are, the EMTs, and they're helping people recover. And so I recognize that we each have our callings in our respective fields, and we need everybody. But I have been disappointed that many Christians have not seen this for the threat to families and to children and to society that it is. Because again, it's not small. This ideology is everywhere. And so it's literally,
you walk into Target, you walk into Walmart, you go to any movie theater, everywhere. It's literally everywhere. You can't escape it. It seems like
No.
you go on any.
Look at our streets every June. We're blanketed in
I was
rainbows.
just going to say that June's right around the corner. We're about to get bombasted with this stuff, and it becomes the point. I heard someone explain it like this, where the church, because I think there is this kind of hesitancy for a lot of Christians to engage with the political sphere because of kind of what you said, and maybe not even that. Maybe it's not even entirely a bad reason that our this world isn't our home. The kingdom of God is not of this world. Those are all true statements. Things like that, or the church should not be a house for a political rally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I agree with all of that. However, it becomes a little bit of a challenging thing when the political sphere is marching, into the church. I think that's more what's happening than the other way around. It's not that the church is becoming more political. It's that the political is becoming more religious, and we're having to now kind of, we don't have a choice other than to confront this stuff. And I don't know if that makes sense.
It's very fraught. Yeah. None of these things are easy. I mean, nobody strikes the perfect balance.
Right.
I don't. I mean, I don't know anyone who does. I think but the frustration is very real, because I think some of what is happening now, and I don't have a perfect read on the landscape, but is that because there's so much frustration among some that they see just be winsome, and that'll win over people who are committed to evil. Yeah, I think it's a good thing to be winsome, but when you're castrating children and you're taking them from their parents, winsomeness is not going to cut it.
No.
The enemy is inside the gates, and you have to discern that there are people who, but you can't know for absolute certain, have very likely been given over to reprobate mind, and they are coming after your children. And if you refuse to face that brutal fact, you're just hopelessly naive, and you lack tremendous discernment. You need to stand up and be counted. You need, it's the Christian thing to do is to resist evil. Right. And that looks like something.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's not about, because people can take that and interpret that as like, oh, so we should just have like a full on takeover. And obviously I've read a lot about,
or as a call to violence. No, I'm not saying
calls to violence and full on takeover and putting all of our eggs in the political power basket. That's not what we're talking about. It's about defense and defense of the innocent, and just standing up for what's right and standing up for what's true, and speaking out when you see something that's wrong. Because if you don't speak out, if you see someone doing something wrong and you don't say anything, you yourself are liable to some degree. Our philosophy here at the Christian Post is very similar to what God told Ezekiel, is that when God said, if you see an evil man and who persists in his ways and you do not dissuade him to leave that behind, I'm paraphrasing, I will hold you accountable for his blood. It's like the watchman on the wall thing. Yeah. Is that Ezekiel?
And how much more, especially now that we are animated by the hope of the gospel, we have the solution. Yeah. So why not even more so? I mean, that was in the Old Testament. So we have the antidote, capital A antidote. So why would we not reprove that which is evil?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to put it. We do have the antidote. It's like we have the drug, you could say, that cures the disease that everybody's plagued with. And a lot of Christians are just sitting around holding it in their hand, and they're not distributing it to anyone that needs it. And then we wonder why our society has just gone to hell, for lack of a better word. It's
I think that the gender issue is kind of crystallizes it, because it's the apotheosis of, does it get worse than cutting off the breasts of a 12 or 13-year-old girl and drugging them and sterilizing them? It's like, this was inconceivable, unimaginable, I think even 10 years ago. I was in New York recently giving a talk, and I said, just think about how psychologically conditioned our society has become, that these atrocities are occurring. Everybody, and maybe they do kind of think it's wrong, but like the fact that there aren't riots in the streets about this, none of this is normal, because 10 or 15 years ago, it should have been a 60 minutes investigative special that a doctor cut the body parts off of one child, let alone the thousands now that has happened to, and the tens of thousands of young adults, and who knows how many have gotten these drugs. I mean, this is one of the worst medical scandals in history.
They make Jeffrey Dahmer look like, they make Jeffrey Dahmer look like Mr. Rogers.
None of this is normal. None of this is normal.
It's crazy.
You should never accept this as just, well, that's the way it is. No, stop.
And you know how you said that there should be riots in the streets. What's funny is there's riots in the streets for when people stand up against this stuff.
Right.
Like we see all these leftists out here going crazy because there's people that
inverted.
Everything's reverse.
And that goes to show, McKill, how much this is a top-down institutional driven thing, because this is not organic. Nobody, just think about the amount of insanity and power it takes to convince people that a child should have his or her body parts that are completely physically healthy cut off. No one thinks that just normally. This is massive amounts of money and institutional power to condition society believe something so insane. I had a friend just tweet that she got back from Borneo in Malaysia, and she didn't see a single trans identified person in 2 weeks. It's a Western, wealthy, top-down social engineering phenomenon from high places. These academic elite types will like to try to make this third gender, all the Katuis in Thailand, all the Fafafine and something, like they'll make all these lies like there's some third gender or whatever. It's like, it's all hokum. There's no third sex. There's no third gamete. There is no such thing as a trans person. There are people that are psychologically distressed. That doesn't make them another sex.
Even a child understands it. You don't have to teach a child that. A child knows that. And you have to teach a child the opposite, that reality isn't reality. And
that's exactly what they're doing. They really are. It's already in. I got a call a couple of years ago from a guy who's got a 3-year-old here in the DC area who's in DC public schools, where they've got the books in his preschool where 3 and 4-year-olds are learning about picking their genders, and they're starting young. It's atrocious. Anyway, but even especially as a Christian, it's important for us to be. I mentioned Ezekiel, but I have to have the discernment like the sons of Issachar, who knew how to read the times and how to act accordingly.
Right.
We need to see this with clear-eyed, spiritually in tune vision, that we recognize that this is a spiritual darkness, a Gnosticism, a war against the image of God. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. This is beyond just an ideological fight. This is full-on spiritual warfare, and journalistically, we have the obligation here to tell the unvarnished truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people.
It seems to the kind of evil behind the transgender movement, similar to behind the radical abortion movement, it seems almost like otherworldly, or like anti-human evil, goes beyond human comprehension. It goes beyond even human ability to conceive just how evil that, you know what I mean? In other words, I think you're right, where it's demonic. I think there's other forces and other the demonic forces that have rebelled against God that are deeply intertwined with this stuff, because it's suicidal. The impulse behind the transgender stuff, the abortion stuff, all of this is radically suicidal. It's anti-human. It's
the culture of death.
It's a culture of death. Yeah. It's a complete death cult. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. There was one story where I heard, I think this maybe a year or so ago. I remember reading about this guy who, he was married, had a kid, was divorced. I think this guy was from Texas. Maybe you've heard of this story, where his wife, I think, moved his son got custody of his kid, moved his kid to California or somewhere, to another state, and basically started to undergo these transition procedures, the hormones and all this stuff, a little kid. And the dad has been trying to fight against this stuff, has had no luck from at least from what I remember reading about this story. Yeah. In your reporting, how common is that? are stories like that you've
Well,
seen?
I'm aware of those stories, and I've interacted with parents who are in those kinds of situations, and what it really shows is what I was saying earlier about the institutional sort of top down capture, because the way gender ideology has functioned in so much of society, especially in more left wing areas of the country and blue states, but in red states too, is that they've revised and revamped policies stealthily in the dark of night. There have been provisions that have been added that many people didn't even realize what they meant or fully entailed. And so, and then you couple that with, even if you live in a conservative state, but you have institutions within that state where the universities that are supplying the staffers who work in social services or in the hospitals, they can get a toehold of power and completely transform the way certain professions operate within even a very conservative state. For example, I was recently speaking with a surgeon, a plastic surgeon, who has been one of the boldest voices speaking out about why so-called gender surgery is not medically ethical. And he's from Alabama, the reddest state in the union. And he tells me that the University of Alabama, Birmingham, it's still woke and captured, like red state, Baptist land, Alabama. And you've got this madness going on. Yeah.
Cultural Marxism. Yeah.
Is it worse in San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York City? And yeah, of course it's worse there. But it's everywhere, and really, this is anywhere that there's Wi-Fi. And with respect to parents, losing custody of their kids, the social services agencies, again, especially in blue states, but Department of, like Child Protection Services, CPS, and other agencies within state governments that have tremendous sway over how you raise your family. The ideologues, foster parenting. The people that determine who gets to have a foster child, it's all drenched in LGBTQ plus Kool-Aid. And so you have to go along with that if you want to be able to adopt or foster a child. And so it's, so it's those laws and policies and institutions within states and certain localities are all pushing this very hard. And so people think that this is not going to affect them, and then they find themselves in a situation. It's like, I had no idea this was growing like kudzu within the neighborhood I live, because it may look, you really may live in a community where you don't see much of this, but it's actually lurking in the shadows, and it will affect life.
I wrote a story a little while back, a couple months back, for Not the Bee, about family who was trying to adopt, but they were barred from adopting because they didn't meet that criteria. They couldn't adopt because they wouldn't sign on to the LGBTQ stuff. They were a conservative Christian family. I'm sure that's way more common than a lot of people realize, even in what you're saying, even in conservative areas. Yeah,
it is. And it's, it goes so much. The depths to which this goes is extraordinary. I said earlier that I feel like I'm punching at the air and people don't believe how terrible it is. It's like, there are stories that I could tell you that are absolutely true that it's still hard to believe. I have trouble believing it, and I know it's true, about how there's, I think in California, just a friend of mine told me that because of the transgender friendly policies, this kid, I don't know if she identifies as non-binary or something other, one of these other dozens of amorphous gender identities, but effectively the kid is treated by the state like an orphan, as though she has no parents, even though she does. And she's enrolled in another school and living with a glitter family of some people, but functionally, she's living with people that's not her parents.
So the state took her away from her parents because her parents wouldn't bow down to this.
And the only thing her biological parents can see is her grades, and that's it. But functionally, the way the policy works is that child is living apart from the parents because the state allows. That's horrible. Yeah, and Abigail Schreier wrote a piece that was just jaw-dropping a couple years ago called "When the State Comes for Your Children." and especially on the West Coast, these young people who are minors, I think even 13, 14 years old, if they're in a shelter, parental consent they're not allowed to get their kids back because of how sensitive services have been. The age of majority has been lowered, and even in Oregon, this was true a couple years ago. I think it's still true today. No reason to think it hasn't changed. That you're allowed to get testosterone in one visit at age 15. You're allowed to consent to medical treatments. That
so you don't have to get like parental consent.
You don't have to. And in fact, I actually know someone personally who their daughter ran away to the state of Oregon, was able to change their name and legal gender in state court with the law fully allowing that. Medicaid bypassed the insurance that she had, and her mother never consented to any of this. And that young girl underwent a double mastectomy and had her entire reproductive system cut out, and also got the hormones, and all of that was paid for. And I mean, that was done that legally in the state of Oregon as a minor. 15? She was 17 at the time of those surgeries.
Yeah.
But that's but
still,
and it's unbelievable that healthy body parts cut off and cut out. And then she also went on to have the phalloplasty surgery, where they harvest a portion of forearm to make a fake simulacrum of a male sex organ. And that was at 19. It's just unbelievable.
I mean, you hear this said out loud, and it's just like, I don't even have any words for it.
Well,
it's insane.
It is insane.
Insane doesn't even do it justice.
No. And who could have ever, I often think about that passage in Romans chapter 1 where Paul is in Corinth, and of course he's seeing all the temple prostitution and the debauchery of that land. And he speaks of the evildoers, and he says, they invent new ways of doing evil. Yeah. And I'm like, this is that. Because you would never think about harvesting a portion of forearm to make a penis. And what kind of depraved mind concocts something so disgusting? Yeah. That's those surgeries are now happening across the country. And this mom that I know had to be in the next building over while the doctors were mutilating her daughter. And it was just unbelievably torturous agony, as she knows that she's powerless to stop it. I think if I was a dad and that was happening, I think I would go to jail for what I would do. That's what this mom says to me. Like, it's like she says it's only by the grace of God that I'm sitting here a free woman in light of what they did to my baby girl. Yeah. Oh my goodness. But so few people have the courage to say these difficult things out loud, much less describe them. And then, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Sometimes they go viral online. You see the mangled and disfigured bodies of these young people who undergo these horrific surgeries that I think should be illegal. And it really, there have been a couple people who, first time I saw one, I felt like the bottom dropped out of the world. And when you see the carnage, I think it just underscores it in a whole new way. And I know someone who shows pictures of those surgeries to people who are sort of getting into this, and right away they're like, okay, no, we're not going down that road, doing that. And I actually think that may have the grisly realities of that has served to wake up a swath of the public who previously were like those I was complaining about earlier, where they just don't get it. When you finally see some of that, I think it's almost more gruesome, you could argue, at least in appearance, than, because I know there's a lot of pro-life activists that'll go out and show photos. And I think that can be definitely be a helpful way to be like, all right, if this is what you're doing, you might want to, if you want to consent to this, you should probably see what it is that you're actually consenting to. I think that's I honestly think that's a good strategy. But I think even and I was just going to say, go ahead. I have there's something that happened that I think really crystallized that very point, because when Elon Musk bought Twitter, that was really huge just for many respects, because the information ecosystem was allowed to be opened up. Now, there's some problems with that too, in light of some of the crap that gets circulated. And so not everything that you see on Twitter is true, but it did allow for greater exchange and flow of information, especially on these issues, which in previous years, when I was in the earlier days of starting, you could get knocked off Twitter for misgendering somebody because of the hateful conduct user rules that was on there. And then when Elon bought it, Christian Post was even frozen out of our account because we called Rachel Levine a man, which he is. And so for 9 months, we were frozen out of our account and then allowed to bet back on. But the following year or so, I remember there was a report of a 2016 Dutch linchpin study, which was sort of served as the basis for allowing youth sex changes. And there was a case report from the Dutch medical report of an 18-year-old man who underwent a sex change surgery where they cut off his genitals to try to invert his penis into making it a vagina, but because he'd been on the blockers, his genitals didn't mature, and so they used a portion of his colon to make a fake vagina. Which, even hearing those words come out of my mouth, is just disgusting. It's so unbelievable. But there were pictures. There were pictures of this guy's disfigured anatomy that they went viral online. I think Billboard Chris and Libs of TikTok shared them, and Elon Musk and Zuby saw it. And so as a result of that, millions of people saw the carnage, and they hadn't before. I mean, that happened like when I started at Christian, that happened in 2016. That information had been suppressed for nearly a decade, and then finally, the ugly truth was undeniable for all to see. And it is horrifying, but that poor young man with the disfigured genitals developed necrotizing fasciitis and got sepsis in his organs, and he died. And so, it's just unbelievable, the kind of thing. Like, if we lived in a same time, we should convene a tribunal for what was done to that poor young man.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something I think that similar to the abortion people, the pro-abortion activists, and then the transgender activists, is there's so much bodily carnage that they're promoting, and they don't, I think a lot of them don't even realize it. I don't think they realize what's actually being done to people, whether it is abortion or especially the transgender stuff. I mean, it's so barbaric and gross, and the amount of infection and death and medical issues and, lifelong trauma that's imposed on people because of this stuff is, I mean, it's hard to calculate it or put words on it, what's actually being done.
And there's something about the transgender surgeries and grotesque disfigurement of children and young people and the scandal of all of that in a way, even though the abortion results in the death of the unborn, and I would have totally agree that the evil that's behind that is similar. I even know and am friends with people who are very supportive of abortion rights that are resisting this transgender stuff.
Well, it's more in your face. Yeah.
It's more in your face. And I think in a way, though, I know, I'm friends who are post-abortive, and I know the lifelong heartache that they deal with, and I have tremendous compassion for them as much as I don't support abortion. But there's something about the drugging and the disfiguring of children that seems a lot more drawn out, long-term, and sadistic than, even though abortion has long-term effects, it's like kind of a once and done kind of thing. It's not, you're not like constantly taking drugs and revising, like it's just more long drawn out and sadistic.
Well, I was going to say this too, even in result of the photos. So we talked about like showing the photos of when you look at a picture of an abortion, you can kind of, I mean, I could see why people would discredit that because it's a human, but it doesn't look like we do right now. You know what I mean? Right. And so you can, in your mind, people can play games and dehumanize you. I think that's barbaric and evil to do so. People can still, I could see why people would make that logical leap in their head. Whereas with the transgender stuff, you can't, it's much more difficult to do that. It's much more in your face. It's people that look, full grown people that they're just literally chopping up right in front of you.
Right. No, it's grotesque. And I was talking with a friend of mine who is one of those people who does ardently supports abortion rights, feminist, and she's adamantly opposed to the trans thing. And we were outside the Supreme Court in December, and for the Scrimeti hearing, which is the Supreme Court heard Tennessee's law. There was a constitutional challenge to Tennessee's prohibition on transing children, and I was chatting with her, and we were on the other side. There was all these trans activists. And I was just saying to her, I said, isn't it amazing that these activists are talking about transgender health care, and they are the picture of unhealth. They are obese. These girls are bearded. They look sick. I mean, these drugs are making them far worse. And they're cheering on trans health care, save our health care, and they look terrible. and it's
Yes.
destroying their bodies. It's so, I mean, it's just, I don't say this to mock them, because frankly, especially if it was done to them as children, they didn't give consent to this. They're victims if they didn't, but a lot of these young people have been misled and enticed into these amorphous gender identities untethered to reality. And as a result of that, they have become guinea pigs and they're being experimented on. And big pharma companies are laughing all the way to the bank.
That was going to be my question: is how do you think big pharma ties into this?
Well, it's
or even just the medical establishment.
It's just so the whole medical establishment that's ideologically captured by this insanity. They are making money off of these kids, and if you can get a swath of children on blockers, you're talking millions of dollars, because these drugs are very expensive, experimental, right. And there's pretty much every children's hospital in the country has a gender clinic in it now. There's some pushback where very prominent one, Washington University of St. Louis, shut down its gender center, as did other clinics throughout the state of Missouri, as a result of a whistleblower I know, who, together with the Attorney General, they passed a law in Missouri, but also the whistleblower was detailing the harms that happened. And as a result of the liability risks and lawsuits, all of those gender clinics have been shut down. But the problem has morphed too, because you have, black market testosterone, people sending drugs through the mail. The problem's still around, and it's just morphing, and new challenges are arising as the culture backpedals from this. But now, I mean, the famous clip about making money is Matt Walsh, when he went down to Vanderbilt. Of course, they are based in Tennessee, and there was a doctor on tape who said that this is a great moneymaker for our hospital, which she was speaking of the phalloplasty surgeries, which are very complicated and require a lot of follow-up care, and just to do them is a lot. And so she actually said it.
Cash cow for them, yeah.
It is a cash cow for them. But more than the money being made in the medical industry, where the real money is in the advocacy space. So when you talk about the millions and gazillions of dollars that the ACLU has and has been given, all of the donor money on the left that are pushing this to make people believe that this is the next frontier of civil rights, this is what all the good people, if you want to be on the right side of history, believe. You're to support transgender rights. Like, that money is enormous.
Education,
so all of that stuff, all of that, even more than what is being made in, selling hormones or blockers or surgeries, and all of the medical stuff around that. Where a lot of the real money is in the advocacy arena. And so these sort of feed off of each other, because there's this psychological pressure that comes with wanting to support the thing that all of the people that you consider, especially if you're not religious, your pastors, but the people in high places that you think are thought leaders worthy of adhering to, like the people in high places are completely captured by this, because it functions very much like de facto religion. In an age of secularization, this has swooped in and filled the void and met a spiritual kind of need for people to. And the way it's been marketed and pushed through popular
makes
media,
them feel like they're morally upright, and
they're playing this part of, helping a marginalized people group, and so it taps into something primal. There's a lot of money around that.
Yeah, wow.
And that's why it's so hard for dissenters on the left to break free, because they're under a lot of. I know some left-wing dissenters, many of them, and they're very brave, because they then get canceled, and they face a program for their willingness to say, yeah, no, the emperor has no clothes.
Well, it's like the golden calf is this transgender stuff in many ways, or really the whole LGBTQ movement of the left. Mm-hmm. That seems to be like the one thing that even the BLM people aren't allowed to criticize. And you know how there's kind of this like intersectional totem pole of oppressed classes in society from a leftist perspective. And that seems to be the top. That seems to be the top one. I mean, even because we always think of like, oh, come on, like the black community can do and say whatever they want because they're at this place in the oppression totem pole, the intersectional totem pole. But then now it's like there's a new sheriff in town,
Yeah.
and it's the LGBTQ mafia,
And the people at the top of the totem pole, the people at the top of that totem pole,
yeah,
are white men with fetishes.
yeah,
Perversely enough, interestingly
Yep.
enough, and it's cheered on by a bunch of white leftist women handmaidens.
yes.
It's just like, so it's even self-defeating.
I watched this disgusting video the other day. I don't even know why. I watched it. It was this reporter who was reading. It was like a 2-hour video, and she was reading comments from like transgender, like chat rooms or Reddit forums or Twitter threads or what, all these YouTube videos, comments, etc. And just reading how much of this, it has little to do, honestly, with their mental health and trying to be healthy, with their physical health, trying to be healthy. It's a sexual fetish. That's what this is at the end of the day. And they're pushing this sexual fetish onto children and forcing them into this. It's again, no words for how evil it is. It's
one of the things that I've seen some honest leftists say various things online, which I take no joy in seeing this, but it is vindicating in a way to see it. But when I saw a couple years ago, as trans activism was really exploding on the scene and people realized they couldn't ignore it anymore, I saw some leftists online saying, man, these trans activists and queer theorists are proving all those preachers from the 80s and 90s correct with their slippery sloperism. Like they were warning about where this would lead, and turns out they were right. And so now I mean, people talk about the slippery slope fallacy. It's like, well, it's actually more of a prophecy, because things are, I mean, Mikhail, I thought that where the Rainbow Brigade was going would be more polyamory kind of thing, and they are, but I had no idea that it was going to be giving children chemical hormone.
And how fast it happened.
How fast, it's gone far beyond anything I could have imagined. And maybe there will be a course correction. I think we're starting to see some of that happen, and I know that at least at the federal government level, there's leverage against trans activism. And so, as a journalist who's been in the trenches for nearly a decade, it's whatever people think of the current administration, the powers that be now in our agencies and our federal government entities are taking active steps to combat this and dislodge this medical scandal from the medical arena and in the government. So there's some encouraging things happening on that front.
Yeah. What do you know of anything that the Trump administration is doing currently?
Well, right from the jump, as soon as President Trump took office, the first day of his administration in the second term, he signed an executive order establishing that man and woman are to be defined on the basis of biological sex. And so just to have that sanity reestablished was refreshing to many people. But then a few days later, he signed one about the medicalization of children. And the language in that executive order was so unequivocal. I thought it was so well written. It called the practice of so-called gender-affirming care on minors a stain on our nation's history, and it must end. And so it was unequivocal about just what this is a scandal, and it called for the rescinding of these transgender-friendly health guidelines that have been parroted throughout all of our mainstream medical associations, and it also empowered federal agencies to take whatever appropriate action they could to address this head on. And Attorney General Bondi has issued a memo that was very well written about just how the Justice Department sees this. The Health and Human Services Department issued a 400-page report recently, which was sort of served as an umbrella. All of the other evidence from European nations that have backpedaled in recent years from this treatment protocol. Our HHS now put out something that was similar and decried this as there's no there for transing children with chemicals and surgery. And then most recently, the Federal Trade Commission announced that in July, they're going to be tackling this from a consumer fraud perspective, where they're going to host a workshop with panels and speakers about why these medical practices are inherently fraudulent. And so the FTC is tasked with policing unjust, deceptive, unfair trade practices and protecting American consumers from fraud. And transgender medicine is full of fraud. And so they're going to be hearing from a wide variety of people in early July. And so I don't know what will happen exactly, but I would anticipate that they will, from their regulatory perch, the commissioners will take a vote to probably classify this as fraud and, who knows, maybe dismantle the industry in its entirety. I hope so anyway.
Oh, good.
It's a multi-headed hydra. But the government agencies at the federal level are absolutely empowered to take action against it. And I can tell you that they are.
That's good. Yeah, that's awesome. Any exciting work? I know we're at close to an hour here. Any exciting projects you're working on or things coming down the pipes?
Yeah. I would point everyone to our documentary podcast that has been quite proud of it, if I must say so myself, at the Christian Post. I started it in 2022. We had the first season. It's called Generation Indoctrination Inside the Transgender Battle. And because we see this issue of such theological consequence, because of what it means for the gospel, but also just because this is a horrific medical and social scandal. I mean, we even have an episode about rapists being housed in women's prisons because of the insanity of gender ideology. We have 4 seasons.
It's just crazy. Even just hearing that said out loud.
I know. And it's legally allowed.
Yeah.
And there's pregnancies that are happening because of it. But we've done 4 seasons of that documentary podcast going in granular detail, explaining what's happening. It's original shoe leather journalism. I mean, documentary podcasts it's done very well. I can't disclose how many downloads we've gotten, but it's taken off a wide cross section of listeners. It's some of the stories are grim, as we've been discussing today, but I would very much encourage everyone to check that out at generationindoctrination.com. That's our landing page. It's also available on Spotify and all major podcast platforms. And we are working on a 5th and hopefully final season of that podcast. That's currently what I'm doing. And we're telling the stories that few will on the media landscape because they're very dark and disturbing, but they have to be declared. I would also point people to, if your church or your pastor is looking for a good, quick read, educational resource to explain just what gender ideology is and how it functions. I co-authored with Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries a free and downloadable ebook called Exposing the Gender Lie, How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology. And you can get that at christianpost.com/ebook/gender-lie. And that's a free resource. We just wanted to be able to equip.
I'll make sure to link all this below for everybody as well.
So. And then check out my colleagues. I'm still writing opinion columns and articles, and my colleagues we're still staying on the issue. Unlike Christianity Today, the Christian Post is tackling.
They're not the same thing. I've heard.
They're not the same thing.
I remember when I first started sending in op-eds to you guys, I had like some people I know in real life be like, "Oh, you're writing for Christianity Today?" No, very different.
The Christian Post touches it. The Christian Post will address issues that Christianity Today won't touch with a 10-foot pole.
Yep.
Sadly, it's a disgrace, and I'm not here to commentate on Christianity Today, but it's very revealing what they choose not to cover. I'll just say that.
They're part of that winsome category that wants to, and I think falsely, maintain some level of social or cultural acceptance, and it's not really panning out that way for them, unfortunately, especially in Christian communities. I think people are starting to wake up and realize what's really going on here all across. Well,
there's a punchy meme that recirculates on Twitter every once in a while, and it's the pink and blue flag. It's the trans flag, but on it says, start thinking of an excuse why you supported sterilizing children.
Yeah.
I would just to anyone who's hesitant about, or if you've been silent about it and you're secretly, you have qualms, but you're not saying anything, I would just remind you, children are being sterilized today. Doctors will go to work and cut the breasts off of 13 and 14-year-old girls today.
Yeah.
Speak up. If that bothers you, say something, because this is not acceptable, and we are going to look back on this chapter in history as a disgrace, as the disgrace that it is. But if you ever thought that if you saw something wrong and you would say something, now is your time.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's just a good rule to live by in general is, if you see something that's wrong, then speak up. Maybe
no matter who
God
it
is
is,
putting you in
whether
that
it's a
place to
Republican
see
or a
it.
Democrat, or it doesn't matter who's involved.
Yeah.
If you see it's wrong, if you're a follower of Jesus, you need to raise the alarm.
Yeah, and I think that's often how God works in people, and accomplishes His will, and is by putting you in scenarios where you're confronted with evil and confronted with things that you see that are wrong, and through His Spirit working in you to actually have the courage to say and do something about it. And I think there's a lot of good people doing that, including yourself. Like you've done a lot of good work with this stuff. So.
Well, it's unnerving. I mean, I don't pretend that it's easy, but it's speak up even if your voice shakes, because I don't know how, especially if it involves a child. Like if you see a child being hurt, like, is it really that hard? I mean,
imagine seeing it in person. Like, imagine you're walking down the street and you see someone punching a child or beating up a child. Are you just going to stand there?
Right.
Like,
I know.
It's the same kind of thing, honestly.
If you knew a guy was like taking a child out to the back of your workplace and cutting his genitals off, wouldn't you say something? It's like, does that make it any better if he's wearing a white coat in a surgical operating room? I mean, just don't. I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify it, but it's like.
Well, nowadays that's called human rights. So,
well, yeah, and we didn't talk so much about that, but it really. I keep using the phrase ideological capture. I think one of the worst spaces, other than the media, is so-called human rights, because if you can basically define anything you want as a human right, you've really gaslit society. And having a master's degree in human rights, I can tell you that all of the major mainstream human rights groups now defend transgenderism as a human right, and among other things like prostitution. And so they have no concept, from my point of view, about what it means to be human. And so therefore, any sort of right that is derived from being human is just going to be very skewed.
Exactly.
And it's abominable what human rights organizations have become.
They're not human. I mean, at the end of the day, they're not. They're not
anti-human
organization. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And and I think some secular Westerners are coming to understand this, but a lot of what we have valued about human rights as we know it stem from the contributions of the Judeo-Christian worldview. And they don't realize that until it's gone, and then it's too late. Yep. But a lot of what, even secular people in America have a lot of baseline Judeo-Christian assumptions animating their thinking. And now that the secularism, what it really is paganism, has become so scorching, is they realize that the foundations upon which they relied are actually Judeo-Christian flavored. Yeah. And they realize, oh, well, maybe I don't believe in God, but I actually don't like godlessness either. And so it reminds me of what John Adams said about, our society. He wrote this letter to his wife, in the early days of our country. He said, our Constitution was written for moral and religious people, wholly inadequate for all other. It's like, well, the founders, they had their problems, believe you me, but they understood that. They were right about that.
Right. It reminds
me of you don't have actual Christians and I would say Jews infusing our society with a lot of robust faith in life. Those Judeo-Christian norms and ethics will fade away.
Right. Yeah, and so will your rights. So will what it means to be
and your rights with it,
as we're saying.
Right.
I think that's a hallmark. I have this book back here about the early church that I've been kind of combing through lately, and one of the chapters in it's talking about basically the new framework that the Christians brought to the early Roman Empire that was radically anti-human is very similar to what we're experiencing now, and the Christians brought this concept of human value, the imago Dei, that we're made in the image of God. We're all uniquely valuable as individuals, and they lived and operated that way, and that was effective, and it radically changed. As the gospel spread and the church advanced, it radically changed that society and that empire. And I think the same thing needs to happen today. We need to kind of have a resurgence of going back to what it means to really be a human and really go, kind of what you're saying, going back to the gospel. And
that was the gift of our faith to the world. And of course, I see rot inside the church, of course, and I don't defend anything evil that's done in the name of Jesus, and that's horrible. But the best essay that I've read in recent memory was in First Things by Louise Perry, who's a feminist but was like honest. And she said that it was in First Things, which is a Christian thought journal, and the title of that piece was "We Are Repaganizing," and she made the point that it was Christians who valorized weakness. And you bring when you regard every person, regardless of their social status, as having inherent dignity and worth, and you valorize that fundamentally changes the equation. Where in ancient Roman times, where baby boys would be killed and they would be buried because the women who gave birth to them were temple prostitutes, and so they didn't have any use for the boys, and so you bring the Christian sexual ethic into that, and suddenly you find that women have for the first time dignity. And so I don't. There was one line in there that just really stood out to me, because while I disagree with feminism as a set of metaphysical claims, what she actually said feminism, and it's like in its truest sense, it is not opposed to Christianity. It is its descendant, because for the very first time in history, women could demand sexual continence of men. That was unheard of in the ancient pagan world, where prostitution and rape of women and children was commonplace, and it was considered like a necessary evil for male sexual release. It was squalor back then, and the Christian faith transformed that culture.
Yeah, and I think I guess it depends on what you mean by, or how you define feminism, or what you mean by that.
Right. No, I obviously there are. But no, I get what you're
saying. The idea Christian, that women are innately valuable and that they should be dignified and honored, and that is a Christian idea.
Even you and I don't, even though we don't agree with like the metaphysical claims of feminism, like we share the true feminism, if there is such a thing, opposition to pornography or surrogacy or prostitution, where women are degraded and exploited. Like there's overlap there that the Christians that's like meaningful.
They're in order to even say that a woman is valuable and dignified and she deserves rights to any degree, you have to borrow from the Christian worldview at some point.
That was her point, and that was her point, and that's right. Yeah,
right. I mean, you see every human rights movement at some point doing that. And the irony is when the trans movement tries to do that while also doing the very opposite at the same time. It's like they're a complete contradiction to themselves. I mean, I would argue the feminist movement is that way,
it is my view, Mikhail, that the most ferocious spiritual warfare today is around our anthropology.
Totally.
Like what it means to be human. Yeah. It's not to say that there aren't other sins that are bedeviling and issues. I mean, I don't want to diminish any of them, but I think that when you see where the locus of the fury and the rage is, it's around where we're now we're in a tremendous battle for the heart and soul of our faith, specifically because of how the culture is raging against everything Genesis 1.
And I feel like we're backed up against a wall in a sense as Christians. Mm-hmm. We don't have the supposed moral high ground in society that we once did, at least from a cultural lens. And so we're backed up against a wall. I think this is why you see a lot of Christians caving on these issues, because they want that moral high ground still. Yeah. And they think the only way to retain it is by going along with this new anthropology in a sense, which they don't even realize they're doing it.
Right. And the flip side of that, there are people who are articulating a lot of truth, but they're really abusive. Like they've got sin and like, it's just it's so
which difficult. Is itself of a morphed anthropology.
Right.
It falls. There's a false view on either extreme. Right. Which of course I've written a lot about that for Christian Post, and I post a lot about that. And anyone that's watching this podcast probably knows that by now. But
God's largely in charge. So we have to keep our eyes on him. And there is a faithful remnant of people who will continue to tell the truth. And we're determined to keep trying here at Christian Post.
Yeah, that's great. It's been great writing for you guys. I'm got a lot more coming down the pipe. So so it'll be good. But anyways, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was great. I'll be sharing this one. And I was going to say I'll be sharing this one in a couple of weeks, but I guess by the time people see this, it'll be already, But anyways, thanks for hopping on, Brandon.
Thank you, Mikhail.